I'm about to wipe Evil Mur's smile clean off his face because this man is a joke. So yesterday I was playing with the contrast in this picture to try and get a better picture of the pattern on Morgan's swimsuit. I realized that half of this picture is not changing at all when I play with the shadows, which is an indicator to me of a photograph being altered. So then I started scrutinizing this picture because why would I ever have reason to doubt it before? And then that's when I noticed this boat seam underneath all of their legs. You can almost trace it all the way until you get to Nolan. Not only are these creases in different places, but there's no shadow, nothing underneath his legs here. In fact, if you look really closely, make sure your brightness is turned all the way up, you can see a seam right here that just stops. And that would connect over here. Then I saw in between this elbow here, look, there is so much fabric that's supposedly his shorts. Not to mention a very intimate hand placement. I mean, that elbow is going all the way up to them hips. And then look, in between Morgan's legs, like, why does this shadow suddenly stop? You can see a seam here and then nothing. And then look at the way Nolan is holding this can. Got one finger like over the lid, but the can looks really like wide. And then his thumb is on the other side of the lid. Like, how would you hold something like that? Now look at this half of the picture. Notice how Nolan's head is casting a shadow going to the left. Same with Eric here. Head casting shadow to the left. Which means right where I am on the screen would be the direction that the sun would be coming from. And yet his shadow is going straight down and his shadow is going straight down and to the right, implying that their light source, their sun, is coming from over here. So is this picture fake? Then I started looking at the photos that they gave to Officer Tatum. Why is Nolan a giant? He and Jax are literally almost the same build and height. And I understand that perspective's a thing, but not when they're this close to each other. Well, when the camera is right here. And look, same problem with this one with the shadows. Shadow going this way, shadow going this way, shadow going this way, shadow going this way, shadow going straight up and down, shadow straight up and down, straight up and down, straight up and down, straight up and down, to the left. And this jacuzzi tub looks normal at first until you zoom in. First off, why is his elbow blending into his hat? Why is his chest an outie? And whose fucking face is that? Because that looks like AI tried to recreate this guy. This is another picture of Nolan with them, and I'm like, why does his eyes look swollen shut? Why his neck is big as his head? But get ready, folks. I'm about ready to blow their little he wasn't on the Triton picture out of the fucking water. Because right here is Morgan's swim trunks. You can see his like beads here, his glasses, his hat. But I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on in this picture. Then I was comparing these two videos and I realized, oh wait, it's a visor. It's a visor hanging off of this. See, there's the bill and like the little like part there. But as I was comparing these two pictures, something fucking hit me.
When the NAACP sends its Office of General Counsel into a case, that is not a routine move. That is an organization with over a century of civil rights history looking at a situation and deciding that what's happening on the ground is not enough. And the fact that it took that level of intervention just to get real pressure behind the death of an 18-year-old young man in Mississippi, that alone tells you something about what this family has been up against. But before we get to the NAACP, before we get to Ben Crump, before we get to the autopsy results and the phone that has now become the most disputed piece of evidence in this entire case, let's talk about what happened on Horn Island on the 4th of July. Because everything that has blown up on TikTok, every question being asked right now, every lawyer walking through that family's door, it all goes back to one afternoon on a barrier island 5 miles off the Mississippi coast. And the story the friends told about that afternoon does not match up cleanly with what the evidence shows. If you're new here, subscribe and hit that like button right now. We are going to keep following this case as it develops, and you need to be here when the next update drops. Now let's get into it. Horn Island is a federally protected barrier island. No stores, no staff, no cell service. You get there by private boat, and on the 4th of July, roughly 300 people were out there. Nolan came with his group. They arrived at 11:14 that morning. GPS confirms it. The holiday got going. People were drinking. The music was up. For a few hours, it was exactly what it looked like. A summer holiday on the water. The last confirmed photograph of Nolan Wells alive was taken at 2:23 in the afternoon. He was on a boat, smiling. Within 2 hours, that same boat was heading home without him. At approximately 4 o'clock, a distress call went out to SEATO, the Marine Assistance Company that operates in the Sound. A teenager on one of the boats called in, saying the bilge pump had stopped working and they were taking on water. The SEATO dispatcher asked about passengers, and the caller said, these are his words. He said everyone was on board. Nolan was not on that boat. So either that caller genuinely did not know Nolan was still on the island when he said everyone, or the word everyone in that moment did not mean what most people would take it to mean. Both of those possibilities raise a question. And a question that's specific, in a case like this, is not something you move past without an answer. SEATO ultimately did not tow the boat. The caller said another boater nearby was going to help them. The GPS shows that boat departing Horn Island at 4:31 in the afternoon. It was back at Fort Bayou by 5:52. Fully docked at 6:06, an hour and 35 minutes back across the water. And somewhere behind them, Nolan was still on that island. The account the friends gave to explain why he wasn't on the boat was this: Nolan chose to stay. They said he had met a girl on the island and planned to get a ride back with someone else. That's what they told investigators. He wanted to stay. He made that call himself. Nothing to worry about. But the girl they're referring to, the one Nolan supposedly stayed behind for, reportedly told investigators something completely different. She told them Nolan had said he was going back to the boat with his group, that he was leaving with the people he came with. Those two accounts cannot both be true. And then there's what Christine Wansley, Nolan's mother, knows about her own son. She has said clearly and consistently that Nolan was not the type of young man who separated from his group on an island in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with no cell service. That is not a mother reaching for something to hold on to. That is a woman who raised that boy and knows how he moved. You don't abandon the people you rode with on open water. That wasn't Nolan. The hours that followed were quiet. The group came back. People scattered the way you do after a long holiday, and Christine didn't panic immediately. She went to the Life 360 app she had on Nolan's phone. The app showed his phone back on land. She saw that, and for a moment, she breathed. Then Warren Hudson called, and that call changed everything. Christine reported Nolan missing to the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources shortly after 11 o'clock that night. What followed was jurisdictional confusion. Multiple agencies with overlapping responsibility in that stretch of water, each trying to sort out who was supposed to be leading the search. That kind of back and forth cost time. In an open water missing persons case, time is the one thing you cannot get back. While that was getting sorted, Christine tracked Nolan's phone through Snapchat, found it at a house where a group of people were gathered. The phone was retrieved, and when she went through it, she found something that stopped her cold. There was no Snapchat content from that day. No photos, no videos, nothing. This was a young man who documented his life. A 4th of July trip to Horn Island with his boys was not the kind of day Nolan Wells would spend with his phone in his pocket. His mother knew it immediately. The family believes content was deleted from that device. That has not been confirmed. But that question burrowed into the center of this case and never left. And it is a direct part of why that phone has now become the most contested piece of evidence in the entire investigation. July 5th, the official search, launched in full. Coast Guard, Jackson County Sheriff's Office, MDMR, National Park Service, United Cajun Navy, a Civil Air Patrol plane, and a county helicopter. All of it out there looking for one young man. MDMR deployed drones to sweep the island's perimeter from the air. The drones went down. Extreme heat killed the batteries before the sweeps could be completed. The search ended without finding Nolan. The next morning, July 6th, a National Park Service ranger found him along the shoreline of Horn Island, face down in the swim trunks he had on the day before. And before the autopsy was finished, before forensic analysis had been conducted, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter stood in front of cameras and told the public there was no evidence of foul play, and that drowning was the likely cause of death. He based that on the accounts of the people who were on the island with Nolan. That was the official posture. Case probably closed. Young man drowned. Go home. Nolan's family said no. Ben Crump came in on July 7, one day after the body was found. If that name means anything to you, and it should, then you understand what it signals when he takes a case. Crump doesn't show up for situations where the answers are clear. He shows up when someone with institutional power needs to be held accountable, and the family has run out of ways to get there on their own. What he walked into was a family that had already been fighting harder than they should have had to fight in the first 72 hours of all of this. And one of the first things Crump noted publicly was that the friends from the trip had already obtained their own legal representation, every one of them, before the investigation was properly underway, before the family had gotten any real answers. The people who were on that island with Nolan had attorneys. That meant Crump couldn't simply sit down with them and hear their account. Everything had to go through lawyers. Pay attention to that. The family commissioned their own independent autopsy. They brought in Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, Jr., a board-certified forensic pathologist and president of the National Medical Association. His examination was funded by Colin Kaepernick. On July 22nd, at the 117th NAACP National Convention in Chicago, Dr. Mitchell delivered his findings to be undetermined cause of death, likewise manner of death. He noted redness in the deep tissue at the back of Nolan's skull. The skin wasn't broken. The underlying bone was intact. But the discoloration was there, visible, documented, and he could not explain it. He could not say how it got there, and he could not rule it out as significant. But here is the detail that most people glossed over in the coverage. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office had retained portions of Nolan's internal throat structures. Standard procedure when drowning is suspected, which means Dr. Mitchell could not physically examine those structures himself. He could not rule in or rule out injury to the neck. Decomposition had also made it impossible to fully assess lung tissue for water intake. And so his final conclusion was this. He could not determine whether Nolan was conscious or unconscious before he entered the water. He could not determine whether any non-accidental factors played a role in his death. He did not say Nolan was murdered. He said the question is still open, and that's the part that mattered. The state autopsy, the official one, is sealed. District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath placed it under grand jury review, which means the public is sitting here with one autopsy that says undetermined and one autopsy they are not allowed to see. That's when TikTok took over. Creators started pulling apart the timeline in detail that, frankly, the official investigation had not offered publicly. Text messages between Christine and Warren Hudson began circulating, messages showing what was communicated between them in the hours and days after Nolan went missing, what questions Christine asked, and what answers Warren gave. In those messages, Warren told Christine that Nolan had been on a 22-foot Triton offshore, while Warren himself was on a separate boat, a 24-foot tide line. He said the boats were on separate paths heading out to the island. He said MDMR, and the sheriff's office had all that information. People online immediately started running that against the sea tow call. They were mapping boat movements. They were asking about a person referred to as Grandpa Jerry. Someone social media claimed was also on Horn Island that afternoon in a position to see what was happening. That has not been confirmed by any law enforcement or official source. There were also questions raised about someone named Wyatt, allegedly present during the events of July 4th, but whose account has never been made public. Here is where I need to be direct with you. Questions raised on TikTok are not answers. A screenshot circulated online is not verified evidence. And a person who hasn't appeared publicly is not automatically hiding something. There are legal reasons, personal reasons, attorney instructions. Silence alone proves nothing. The difference between what has been confirmed and what is being speculated online is the difference between pursuing justice and building a case out of noise. What we can say with certainty: the FBI was brought in to assist with digital evidence. 60 witnesses were interviewed. The Congressional Black Caucus called on the DOJ and FBI to open a federal probe, and a reward of $125,000 put up by Reverend Al Sharpton, Tyler Perry, and Terrell Owens is sitting uncollected, waiting for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. That number hasn't moved because no one has come forward with answers. Now let's talk about the phone, because this is where the case cracked open publicly, and it's where the narrative around this family got twisted in a way that has to be corrected. Christine was not refusing to let the phone be examined. That is not what happened. In July, her legal team and District Attorney McElrath sat down and agreed to a joint forensic examination. Both sides confirmed that. That agreement was on the record. Then on August 12th, the DA's office sent a letter directing the family to surrender the phone by 9 a.m. on August 14th, less than 48 hours notice. Christine and her family were out of state. Ben Crump's team called it unreasonable. They called it not made in good faith. And as of the most recent reporting, the family's attorneys had offered a 4-day window for the DA's office to choose a mutually agreed date, with the original joint examination terms honored. There is a fundamental difference between refusing an investigation and refusing to hand over evidence under conditions you believe were changed without your consent. One of those is obstruction. The other is a family protecting their right to due process after watching, step by step, the way this investigation has been handled from the very first night their son didn't come home. And after everything Christine and Elmore Wonsley have already witnessed in this case, the early declaration of probable cause, the jurisdictional confusion, the locked up witnesses, you cannot look at that woman and say her caution was unreasonable. The phone has not been examined. The timeline has not been fully reconstructed. The investigation is still moving. And then on August 17th, 2026, the NAACP's Office of General Counsel walked through the door. The NAACP's Office of General Counsel is not a press release. It is not a symbolic gesture. When that office commits to a case, it brings with it the full legal and investigative infrastructure of the oldest and largest civil rights organization in the country. It means attorneys with federal jurisdiction experience. It means institutional relationships with the Department of Justice that individual legal teams simply do not have. It means the kind of sustained, organized pressure that doesn't go away when the news cycle moves on. And that is precisely what makes their entry into this case significant, because news cycles do move on. TikTok moves on. The comment sections quiet down. The hashtags lose momentum. That is the pattern. That is exactly how cases like this one get buried, not through one dramatic act, but through the slow erosion of public attention. The NAACP walking in on August 17th was a direct response to that pattern. It was an institutional way of saying, we are not letting this become a footnote. Ben Crump, the NAACP's general counsel, and the entire legal apparatus now surrounding this family are aligned on one demand: a full, transparent, federally supervised investigation into the death of Nolan Wells, not a county-level conclusion drawn in the first 48 hours, not a sealed autopsy the family isn't allowed to see, a real investigation with real accountability conducted in full view. Now, the Congressional Black Caucus had already sent that request to the Department of Justice and the FBI weeks before the NAACP's formal entry. That letter carried weight. But letters from Congress and legal representation from advocacy organizations operate on different timelines and through different channels. What matters now is that both tracks are running simultaneously. Legislative pressure from Washington and direct legal representation on the ground in Mississippi. That is not a small thing. That is a coordinated effort. And it is exactly the kind of coordination that has historically been required to force accountability in cases where local institutions have already signaled they are satisfied with an incomplete answer. The FBI's involvement in the digital evidence side of this investigation is also worth sitting with. When federal agents are brought in to assist with phone forensics and witness interviews in what a county sheriff characterized as a probable drowning, that gap between the local conclusion and the federal response tells you something. Those two things do not usually exist in the same case unless someone with authority above the county level looked at what was happening and decided it warranted a second set of eyes. 60 witnesses were interviewed, Investigators put out a public call for unedited video and photo content from anyone who was on Horn Island that day. The reward is $125,000 and still unclaimed. All of that is happening in a case where the official local position has been, from nearly the beginning, that there is nothing here to investigate. Christine Wansley is not a woman who is going to be worn down by delay. If you have watched any of her public statements, if you have listened to her speak about her son, you understand that she is precise. She is not emotional in the way that people sometimes expect grieving mothers to be. She is not falling apart in front of cameras. She is organized. She is tracking every detail. She remembers every communication, every timestamp, every inconsistency she has encountered since the night she first couldn't reach Nolan. That is a woman who has already decided that the only way through this is documentation and persistence. And what she documented, starting with those text messages with Warren Hudson, continuing through the phone retrieval, and building through every public statement she has made since, is a picture of a family that has been managing the investigation from the outside because they had no confidence the investigation was being managed properly from the inside. That is a serious thing to say. It is also what the evidence of this family's experience supports. There are people watching this case who have already made up their minds. There are people online who have named suspects, who have constructed full theories, who have decided they know exactly what happened on Horn Island that afternoon. And I want to address that directly because it matters to how this case gets resolved. The people who were on that island with Nolan are human beings. Some of them may have seen something. Some of them may know more than they have said publicly. Some of them may be entirely innocent of anything beyond being present on a terrible day. None of that gets sorted out through social media pressure. None of it gets sorted out through harassment, through showing up at people's homes, through flooding someone's comments. That behavior does not help Nolan. It does not help his parents. And in the worst cases, it actively damages a potential prosecution by creating legal complications that defense attorneys can and will use. What helps Nolan is exactly what his family is doing, demanding a transparent process, insisting that the phone examination happen under the agreed terms, applying legal and political pressure through the proper channels, keeping the case in the public eye with facts, documented source, verified facts, not speculation. That's what this video is doing. That's what you participating in this conversation is doing. Because attention, when it's informed, is its own form of accountability. Here is the full picture as it stands today. Nolan Wells died on or around July 4th, 2026. His body was recovered July 6th. The independent autopsy says the cause and manner of death are undetermined. The state autopsy is sealed. The phone at the center of this investigation has not been forensically examined under the joint terms both sides agreed to. No charges have been filed. No arrests have been made. The sheriff of Jackson County drew his conclusion before the science was done. The family rejected that conclusion, built their own legal team, brought in their own forensic expert, and are now backed by Ben Crump, the NAACP's Office of General Counsel, and enough congressional attention that the Department of Justice has been formally asked to step in. And somewhere in a sealed record in Mississippi, the state's official autopsy results are sitting behind a grand jury review that the public and this family are still waiting on. That is where this case lives right now. Not closed, not resolved. Open, and being pushed harder than it has ever been pushed. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He kissed his mother before he left that night. He cooked her dinner. He walked out that door into what should have been a regular holiday weekend, and he never came home. His parents have spent every day since then fighting through grief and confusion and institutional resistance just to get the basic answers that any family deserves when they lose their child. This case is not finished. The phone still needs to be examined. The sealed autopsy needs to be released or at minimum reviewed by independent forensic eyes with the family present. The witnesses who lawyered up still have accounts that investigators need access to. And the question that has been sitting at the center of all of this since July 4th. How does a young man end up face down on a shoreline on a federal island in the middle of the afternoon while 300 people were within shouting distance? That question does not have a satisfactory answer yet. We are going to keep following this. Every development, every court date, every press conference, every document that comes out through official channels. We will be here. If this video gave you something you didn't have before, share it. Not for the views, for Nolan. Because the more people who know this story in full, the harder it becomes for it to get quietly buried. That is how this works. That is how families like the Wansleys get the pressure sustained long enough to matter, like this video. Subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment below. Tell me what part of this case you think is most overlooked, because there's a lot more to dig into, and I want to know what you want to see covered next. Nolan Wells deserves answers, and we're not done until he gets them.